Draft grades are far from a new concept on YouTube when it comes to NFL content. There's plenty of people out there who dedicate a channel to a specific team, and we'll talk about each individual pick in depth, or they'll talk about the draft class at whole in depth. There's plenty of people out there who cover the league at large, such as myself, that will go division by division or conference by conference, or talk about the draft in one big video. But you never see anybody talk about each individual team in their own draft grades video. All 32 teams, 32 videos. You never see that happen until now. Because I was disappointed with the pre-draft content I was able to put out, because as a college student, free time is a luxury that I don't always have, I have decided to make up for it by making 32 videos throughout the month of May, talking about my thoughts on all 32 teams' drafts. And I'm really excited to get into this. Keep in mind, as per usual with draft grades videos, I know that I am going to be wrong on most of these, primarily because we haven't seen these guys play. We don't know how they're going to be developed, all of that good stuff. This is just my analysis based upon how I graded different players leading into the draft. You know, if I think a guy was overdrafted based on my evaluations, underdrafted, et cetera, et cetera. That's what these grades are based off of. I also don't think I'm better than any NFL GM out there. I'm just a 21-year-old college kid who spends the little free time he has watching film. So bear with me. People seem to like my opinions on this kind of stuff. I like sharing it, so I'm going to continue to do so. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into my first draft grade video talking about my favorite team, the Chicago Bears. Kicking us off here with the Chicago Bears, they only had 5 picks this year, one of which they traded for during day 3 of the NFL draft. But going into this, we knew this could be a class that would genuinely alter the trajectory of the Chicago Bears going forward. This was a huge draft for this team, and I think they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Starting out by drafting Caleb Williams, who, I know when I made my QB rankings video, I had him as my QB 1B. I had Drake May ahead of him. But the more I watched him, and the more I watched May, and the more I watched the entirety of this class, really, from different angles, from different perspectives, right? Watching the receivers that they were throwing to, watching guys like, in this instance with Caleb, Taj Washington, or Brendan Rice, watching them go up against different defenses, watching how different defensive players attacked them and how they performed against them. Most notably, looking at the USC-UCLA game, Laiatu Latu, who, in my opinion, is the single best edge rusher I've ever evaluated. Granted, I have to put a disclaimer on that because I've only been evaluating players for 3 years, but he was absolutely incredible. And you watch that UCLA-USC game where he was an absolute game wrecker. I mean, he absolutely took off during that game. Yet there were still moments where Caleb was able to evade him and make him look goofy, and Caleb was able to make these big plays despite playing behind an offensive lineman that was comprised of toddlers, So I really do think Caleb is special. Again, I changed my opinion pretty quickly after watching games like that and, going back and just watching them from different angles. That was the big thing for the quarterbacks for me this year, was watching them from different angles, different perspectives. It became pretty apparent that Caleb was separated from the rest. Now, I still had Drake as my QB2 when it was all said and done, still had him as a top 5 player in the class, and we'll talk about him when we talk about the Patriots. But, Caleb is just different. And I'm not the first person to say this, I won't be the last. But I really do think Chicago got the guy. I'm more convinced with him than I was with Fields. When Chicago drafted Fields, I admittedly wasn't a huge fan of his coming out of Ohio State. I had him as my QB3 that year, I think, behind Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence, and only one of those guys actually ended up mattering. But, Caleb is, I've never been this sold on a Bears quarterback on draft night and right after the draft. He's incredible. He's got the personality for it. If you're one of those people that hates that Caleb Williams is comfortable in his own skin or cries because he paints his nails, please grow the fuck up. Please. It shouldn't still have to be said. We should be over this as a society. We should not care. But there's still plenty of grown-ass men who are crying and throwing hissy fits because Caleb Williams paints his nails to support his mom's nail, what's the word I'm looking for here? A nail painting business. I know there's a more specific term, Excuse me for not knowing it, but the point is he does it to support his mom's business and because he fucking can. You know, he's a young man that is making millions of dollars, more money than any of the people that bitch about his nails ever will. He's a great leader. His teammates have never had a bad thing to say about him. His coaches loved him. Chicago loves him. Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus love the guy already. He's not this demon or this diva that the media and pissy middle-aged white men want him to be. You know, he's not Shadir Sanders? It's fucking Deion's kid at Colorado that's in the news right now and is throwing a hissy fit, or not throwing a hissy fit, quote tweeting his teammates and talking shit and whatever his name is, however you say his name. Caleb is not him. He is what the media wanted you to think Caleb was in terms of being a diva and a bad teammate. So I'm ecstatic to have Caleb. I can't wait to see him play in Chicago. And then with the Chicago Bears second pick at 9, they took Rome Odunze. So you land, in my opinion, 2 top 5 players in the class. On my big board, Caleb was number 2, and on my big board, Rome Odunze was number 5. 2 top 5 players in the class. Rome was my wide receiver too. I am so excited. Rome is one of those guys that just catches everything that's thrown his way. He's very Alshon Jeffrey in that regard. You know, if you remember Alshon, that little dominant stretch he had in Chicago, he didn't drop anything. He was utterly incredible as a pass catcher. And Rome has a lot of that to his game. He also is a very, you know, savvy and technically sound route runner. There's a little bit of Keenan Allen in his game in that way. I've seen people make that comparison. Obviously, he gets to play with Keenan for at least the first year of his career now. So I'm so happy that these two landed in Chicago, not only because of the talent, but you see the off-field chemistry that they're already developing. That's important. You want a quarterback that wants to hang out with his wide receivers and gets along with his wide receivers like him and Rome have been getting along. It's an incredible pairing. I'm so excited to have the two of them in Chicago. And then you go into the third round on day 2, Chicago obviously not having a second round pick, traded that away to get Montez Sweat. The third round, you take Karan Amagaji. I believe I'm saying that name correctly. I need to learn. I'm terrible with names. I made this joke all of last offseason when I was talking during, you know, my post-draft grading videos, and I'm going to continue to bring it up. I'm terrible with names, not because I'm, like, not bothering to learn. It just takes me a little while to get them right. The example I like to go to is Chris Olave. When he was coming out of the draft, because I don't watch a ton of college football until it comes time to, you know, talk during the draft, or talk during the offseason, talk about the draft. I don't watch normal college football. I watch tape, right? I'm not a college football fan. I'm an NFL fan who watches a lot of tape. I don't hear the announcers say these guys' names constantly. So for months and months and months, to bring it back to Chris Olave, I genuinely thought his name was Chris Olave. I really did. I was calling him Chris Olave until someone in my TikTok comments was like, dude, it's Olave. You are pissing me off. Say his name right. So it's not a lack of awareness thing. It's just a I'm an idiot thing, and I don't hear these names over and over again like a lot of people do. So Karan Amagaji, again, if I'm mispronouncing the last name, I do apologize. I know it's Karan because I've heard Matt Eberflus say that during a press conference. But you get, you know, in this player, you're getting a super athletic, super smart guy with the size you want. He has a 36-inch long arms. He's 6'5", just over 300 pounds. Perfect build for an offensive tackle. He's got the build. He's got the size. He's got the athleticism. He just needs some work. You know, coming up from an Ivy League school, there were a lot of things that he wasn't necessarily asked to do in the technical aspect of things. Like his hand usage is really good, but there's still some technical lapses there. And it's because if he slipped up against Ivy League competition, it didn't cost him. So he didn't have to put in, not that he wouldn't, but he technically didn't have to put in that extra work to perfectly refine his skills. He was good enough because it was an Ivy League school. They were more worried about him just winning reps. They weren't hammering in like perfect technique week in and week out. So I understand why he's a little bit lacking. They're still very good. I think in the third round, that's incredible value. I had him as the 81st player on my big board. He was definitely the best tackle available when Chicago was drafting. And then in the fourth round, draft Torrey Taylor out of Iowa. And I typically don't like drafting kickers and punters. I'm typically against that process because we've seen time and time again it doesn't work out. However, given how bad Trenton Gill was last year, I get it. I absolutely understand it. You had one of the worst punters in the league last year. There were a lot of instances where the Bears, their opponents, were getting the ball way closer to the 50-yard line than they should have. You really got to worry about that field position battle, and Tory Taylor is going to help you with that. He was the biggest weapon Iowa had last year, won them a couple games single-handedly by getting the ball where it needed to be in terms of field position, giving the other team's offense very disadvantageous situations, and Iowa always has a good defense, so their defense was able to capitalize. Chicago has a great defense right now, so Taylor's a player that they'll be able to capitalize off of. He's also supposed to be the greatest punter prospect of the last 20 years. I'll tell you outright, I don't scout punters. I'm not a punter savant. I don't know all the ins and outs of scouting punters. I just see a guy with a big leg that can pin the ball inside the 5, and I'm like, yep, that's good. I don't know any of the technical stuff to it. So excuse me for not having a super in-depth analysis on Tory Taylor, but I am excited. People in Chicago are already calling him the crocodile punter, given that he's Australian. I love it. He's going to be a super fun player to have around. But by far, the pick I was the most excited about for the Bears, and I say this because I knew Caleb was coming, and everyone was mocking Rome Odunze to Chicago, and once he started to fall, I was like, oh my god, it's really going to happen. The pick that I did not expect to happen, that excited me the most, was Austin Booker. If you don't know, Austin Booker was my favorite player in this entire draft process. In this entire draft cycle, there was not a single player that I liked more, that I was pushing harder for than Austin Booker. He was incredible in the few games he played at Kansas. I get it. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's a little bit raw. This is a 5th round pick, right? You can afford to take a guy like that in the 5th round. But I was very, very high on Austin Booker. I had a late 1st round grade on him. I had him as the 4th edge rusher on my big board, ahead of guys like Chop Robinson and Braylon Trice, Marshawn Nealand. Jonah Ellis is who I had at 6. I loved Austin Booker. He was a top 30 player on my big board, specifically number 28. And when Chicago traded back into the 5th round, I lost my mind because I thought, oh my god, it's really happening. We're getting a guy who is a super freaky athlete that has genuine instincts against the run, does not play like a redshirt sophomore player. You'd expect him to be the super, super raw pass rusher that just wins with strength and athleticism. That's not the case. Austin Booker has a surprisingly good arsenal of pass rushing moves. Now, there needs to be some work done. I'm not saying he's Laiatu Latu, but he's way further along in his development than you'd expect. The big thing with me is he needs to put on a little bit of weight. He's apparently put on some of that weight already. He's got a big enough frame to continue filling that out. And I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but I absolutely adore it. He is so similar to Max Crosby coming out as a prospect that I can't help but get excited. And you look at the guys that helped Max Crosby develop I'm pretty sure he was in Oakland. Yeah, they were still in Oakland when he got drafted. You look at the guys that helped him develop. Their defensive line coach, who I cannot remember the name of for the life of me right now, is Chicago's current defensive line coach. The other guy, the guy that Crosby gives a lot of credit to, was Matt Eberflus's mentor and Rod Marinelli. So you've got Rod Marinelli's protege and the same defensive line coach, both having a hand in Austin Booker's development after they turned Max Crosby into arguably the best edge rusher in football. Do I think Austin Booker is going to be the best edge rusher in football at any point in his career? Probably not. He's a 5th round pick. I'm not going to put those expectations on him. But I do believe he has the tools, he has the drive, he has the mentality to be a really, really good edge 2, if nothing else. Him and Montez Sweat can be a demonic edge pairing. And if Dravon Dexter can start to develop, you have Andrew Billings at nose tackle. Look the fuck out for Chicago's defensive line. So I absolutely adore going back into the draft, getting him. You trade away a 4th round pick to the Buffalo Bills next year for this 5th round pick. So ironically, you trade back for a pick that you had already had that you sent to Buffalo to go out and get Ryan Bates. Little full circle moment there. But I absolutely love this Bears draft class. I've been talking about it for too long. I wanted to set a limit of 10 minutes per team in these videos. Chicago, we're already at 13, almost 14 minutes. But I'm a Bears fan. Of course, I'm going to talk about them a little bit longer. Other teams probably won't take as long. But with Chicago's draft, I'm giving them an A+. This was perfect. This is the type of draft that completely changes the trajectory of your franchise. The Bears could have stopped drafting after the first round, and I would have given them an A+ for getting Caleb and Rome. But I'm so glad they didn't stop, because getting Karan, getting Austin Booker, and getting Tory Taylor are all guys that can be legitimate contributors. Potentially right now, I think we'll see Austin Booker a lot on like pass rushing downs. And obviously Tory Taylor starting at punter. And Karan, I think he's going to be a good swing guard / tackle, kind of like the Larry Borum role that Chicago's had. We've had some injuries on the interior of the line. Tevin Jenkins struggles with injuries. Nate Davis was up and down last year. If a guy gets hurt, Karan can step in right away and at least be serviceable at tackle or guard. In long term, you're hoping you can develop him like you were able to develop Braxton Jones. So this is probably my favorite Bears draft class ever. This is the most the deepest I've gone with scouting on different players. And Caleb, Rome, and Booker were easily 3 of my 10 favorite players in the class. So for Chicago to get all 3 of them is awesome. In fact, I would go even further. I would say these are 3 of my top 5 favorite players in the class. And I would have said that before the actual draft. Rome was my favorite receiver. Caleb was my favorite quarterback. Austin Booker was my favorite player, period. So I'm just so excited. And again, I didn't want to take 15 minutes to talk about the Bears draft class, but I had to, because I'm a Bears fan and I'm super pumped with what we're doing right now. So shout out to Ryan Poles. I think he absolutely knocked it out of the park this year.
Had a chance on the throwback.
This was an ill-advised throw. What an unbelievable catch by Cole Kmet. And he cups it too. No movement when he hits the ground, tucked up against his shoulder. Wow.
Using that